So let's see. Today I am discussing crossing borders with OpenStack. This little chat comes from some past experience. Quick introduction. Principal cloud architect at Zefflin Systems. As Beth mentioned, some companies are startups. We're a startup. We have about 5 people right now, and we're growing this year. I am, in theory, keeping this pretty short, so there are some couple links there if you want to go take a look at me on LinkedIn or our site, Zefflin, or send me an email. I will throw in a couple little backup features here off the map. Just because of the talk on pets and cattle, I find it kind of interesting. In '84, I was working on a space program, and I worked with a couple of interesting little things that I would say were pets, but they might not be as pet as some of the modern things are today. We had a lot of virtualization. We had software-defined networking, which was pretty interesting. We had these things that we called buffers, and we would define on those buffers remotely exactly what was there. We had front-end computers, and we would define what software was on there, and they would do different things like talk to main engines or talk to the fuel system or route data from a receiver dish in Australia, all these different kinds of things. We would do a lot of live changes. And to us, those things probably were pets because they were so important. Even though we could move them around, those functions had to live and they couldn't change. Also, as Beth said, you couldn't change them overnight. They were very serious, right? I was on the program when Challenger blew up. And one of the issues there, of course, is we lost people, right? And some of those people were maybe more important to us than pets because the zero downtime concept came a little bit too hard, right? And it destroyed the program for quite a while, which is why I went back into the public industry instead of the government. So anyway, I'll jump forward here. So I've worked with a few of the telecoms in the U.S. and abroad. Swisscom, I mentioned to Beth, is one of them. Some of these were pretty large. I've done small but usually strategic architecture from deployments as we talk in server numbers sometimes around 5 to 325,000 physical servers. Those things span sometimes countries. Other times they're just all within one big country. The U.S. has some deployments that are obviously on this scale. So I've worked on IS, PaaS, and SaaS, product roadmaps, POCs, and so forth. Vendor integrations and alliances have been kind of key within the OpenStack space. I had a pleasure of working with, Josh McKenty and Kyle McDonald on some pretty interesting things with OpenStack. Toby Ford over at AT&T. So what am I talking about here with borders? I think everyone today has some concept of OpenStack being all over the world, right? I mean, we have documentation projects that are being contributed, out of China and India. I mean, there's just a huge amount of this stuff going on. We have people involved in this in every continent, as far as I'm aware of. I don't know if it's every country necessarily, but certainly a huge number of them. And I'll get back to why OpenStack is important in this, but we also have this technological thing. Products do and don't play well together. The companies don't necessarily want to all work together, right? VMware doesn't necessarily want to be in bed with IBM or what have you, those kinds of topics. Sometimes they can't. There are legal reasons they can't, right? Previous agreements or, things from one country to another where you can't export technology. The nice thing about OpenStack, where that's not 100% of a solution, is that you can have a similar platform that's used in all these different countries, even though maybe AT&T, for example, can't use code that was written in some particular country. They can use the same product, which uses maybe the same APIs, right? If you're in China, for example, maybe the government wants to have a certain encryption algorithm that they know and how to decrypt that the NSA in theory doesn't. Those kinds of things definitely do come up, but the platform allows for that, right? And so on to the economic, OpenStack is in the concept of being open source. You can install it at home on one server, maybe one junky old PC for that matter, if you really have one that's not too bad. So it has this economic space as well, where it crosses the border of you don't have to be an enterprise to run OpenStack. You can be a startup, or you can be a company that's been around and you just want to play with it and make a small investment. Telcos, generally in theory, we don't have small investments in telcos. There's tons and tons of money, so they dump a lot of money into something. But they do have teams that need to be able to do something a little bit off of the radar, and they want to do something without too much investment, and they will do that, right? I have a few teams where they just want to go find out if it's a good idea, and they want to buy some servers and install some software. They're going to maybe do the Ubuntu track, right? Maybe they're going to be a little more serious. They would have a couple, last year, still talk to Piston, right? Maybe they'll talk to Red Hat right now, and there's a few different changes there. But those things, again, they will happen in a telco as well as anywhere else. But that economic window also gives the telcos, as well as the rest of us, this social component, right? Organically around the world, we have global teams that are solving these same problems. They're communicating. They're like everyone who's still in the room today, right? We have some idea of what's going on together. I talk to folks from India all the time. That's one of the biggest ones that I see usually, right? I see folks from, Poland or Siberia or whatever. I mean, they're all over the place. So these borders are the borders I'm talking about, and OpenStack is crossing them. There's another thing which comes into why this matters to the telcos, but I'll kind of through that a little bit more as we go. So we're enabling people. My discussion is mostly about people, right? The technology side, I think some of the other folks are really getting deep into that, which is extremely cool. But to me, the biggest thing right now is we're making this transition, and people are where we're affecting most right now, right? We've enabled all these people, or all right now so heavily overemployed that we get hired away from each other every 15 minutes. But we've affected developers, we've affected technology companies. There's lots of new firms, lots of money going into it, right? Let's see, let me jump forward. So we have this great thing. I have these old pictures. Now let's jump through these ones because you guys all know them. So I want to talk a little bit about things to consider. A telecom is what we all use. Everyone uses one. You may think you don't, or you may think that you get paid from some piece of paper that somehow doesn't go to a bank, and forget that the banks are all using telcos. And everything that you do in the world today somehow goes over a telco, right? If you're watching TV, if you're doing pretty much anything that allows anything to happen that's communication, telecommunications carries it, right? So I looked at this one and I said, okay, let me talk about it in reference to, say, cell phones. I went out at the bottom of the discussion, I have some references. But there's on the order of, 6.8 billion cell phones in the world right now. And just the number is daunting, right? I mean, there's only 7-point-something billion people in the world, right?
I was off because I forgot. A lot of people have two phones.
Yeah, a lot of people have multiple phones. They have, one for their 5-year-old, one for their 6-year-old, two for themselves, right? So you look at some of the numbers. China has something like 1.27 billion cell phones, right? We don't even have that many people in our country, divide it by 3 and we get close, right? Or 4. India has just under 1 billion. The US has 327 million cell phones, right? Mongolia, 3.5 million cell phones. I didn't even know they had phones in Mongolia. I mean, Zimbabwe has.
They don't have any phones. They just have cell phones.
Yeah, they just have. They don't have the old style infrastructure, right? That's one of the reasons China has so many, because they don't have the old style infrastructure. They said, well, it's going to go right forward to cell technology. Canada only has 28.2 million cell phones. Wow, that just blew my mind, right? Israel has 9.3.
And there's only 6 million of population.
Right. So I thought these are pretty interesting because what do you do with your cell phone? I mean, the older phones, sure, all you had was voice, right? But the phones get replaced at a pretty rapid rate. And I don't know exactly what functionality you have on phones in Zimbabwe, but it can't be so old that it doesn't
Banking.
have mobile apps.
They do mobile banking.
Mobile banking.
Microcredit.
There you go. So any of those things, I mean, they fit into this concept today of cloud, right? So if you have, like Ericsson predicts, right, 9.2 billion subscribers by 2019, right? Well, if we have 6.8 now, everything between today and those 9.2 are going to have some kind of cloud-enabled application, right? You have your contact list, you have, your Angry Birds app getting its advertising, and all these kind of things. All of these things have cloud apps. So that means you have something on the order of a minimum of 9 million concurrent cloud connections going over telcos by 2019. Right now, there's in theory only 6.8. But I would argue it's something more like 100 times that. Because if you look at how apps actually work, they have multiple connections all the time, right? You may have just one cell connection, but you have multiple cloud connections, so because they're going to all kinds of different actual resources. There's some other things maybe to consider that I'd like to talk about a little bit as far as scratching the future. And it's not the future really. This comment down here, other emerging trends. Cluster computing on cell phones is edging towards reality. It's not just this cool thing that's been done in a college lab. It definitely has been done in a college lab, right? 2012 and so forth. MIT has this cool thing out. You might find it interesting. Look up. It has this play on words, diploma, right? And it's distributed computing over shared memory on your cell phones, right? I don't know if they meant this boink to sound like bionic or something, but are you guys familiar with the old SETI model where on your PCs you could have your screensaver? The same thing is going on now on cell phones, right? You can get your app, you can do these shared applications, right? You're kind of for free doing this contribution, right? But the cell phones today, as we've mentioned a lot of times, have so much compute power, they're 100 or 1,000 times more powerful than some of the older platforms. In 1984, 85, 86, when I was working on the shuttle program, for example, we definitely had virtual kinds of computing. We had simulated computing. We could load a particular kind of a processor onto an old machine. But these machines sometimes had core memory. They were really, really slow, right? 128K of memory was NASA grade expense. It was very pricey stuff, right? Go that way. There we go. So then I get back down to these billions of people who have cell phones. I was talking to one of the gentlemen earlier today that in our generation, my generation, I'm very, very young. The concept of Star Trek had this beam me up Scotty thing, right? And you had this tricorder, and it was this cool little device, and it would do all these amazing things. And people in my generation, I think, in the world, all over the world, still believe a lot of this stuff is science fiction, even though it's real, right? But billions of people don't know the difference anymore. They really don't know. They don't have enough technological savvy to know how actually impossibly hard it is to do this, right? That it works at all is amazing. I mean, literally amazing, right? But if you look at the 5-year-old who, gets their mom's iPhone or their dad's, Windows pad computer and gets up in the morning and starts playing games before mom or dad are even awake, right? And has loaded software on there, has, rewritten Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, right? To those folks, those are the leaders of technology because they're the ones demanding, right? They don't believe it'll fail. This, the 6 nines concept, right? Those kids will be screaming at their parents if it doesn't work. And to them, they don't know that there's a cloud. They just know that they can do something, right? So this magical device. And so I get into this thing again of the telcos. So the phone company today is a cloud company. You could argue it's always been a cloud company because it's always been telecommunications, right? But it's a cloud company because they're really considering changing. They are changing, right? The telcos are changing their own industry. They're changing their industry using OpenStack. As I said, because OpenStack gives us this common layer that goes all over the globe. Everyone can use it one way, shape, or form, right? And OpenStack has achieved these states, right? It's proven. I mean, a couple of years ago, it was this cool idea that people thought, well, it's never really going to go anywhere. But it is proven. It's being used in the Fortune 1 company in the world today, Walmart, right? That's about as big an enterprise organization as you could use to justify that it's actually there. That's pretty much landed. It certainly came out of NASA, so it's government approved, right? And it operates in the world of the other big dogs. OpenStack is a big dog now, right? It's working. We have the guys today, Oracle and EMC are talking about it, right? I came out of HP, and HP has its own distribution now. We've got VMware and we've got Red Hat, and so OpenStack is a big dog, right? It's proven. It's supported by other distribution vendors, right? Major vendors. It's available globally. So getting back to the phone, right? The app on the cell phone isn't just an app. It's a user experience, right? And so the cloud is a user experience. Again, if you look at those people who really don't know how any of this stuff works, right? OpenStack is now one of the main methods that the telcos are using to deliver that impenetrable experience, right? It's up almost 100% of the time, so close to it that a few seconds to a couple of minutes out of a year, some 5-year-old can't get to an app. They're going to cry for a couple seconds and it's going to start working again, right? Now, I might be picking on the 5-year-old, but that 5-year-old 10 or 15 years from now is going to be making the next set of new things that we're all in this room going to be shocked by, right? Let's see. So telecoms have these other things they have to do, right? They're adding compliance and security, and they have to have public safety. You need to be able to do your 911 call. You need to have your alert if a child has been kidnapped or something. There's all kinds of things that we don't really think of as part of OpenStack. You don't think of them as part of VMware. But a telco has to do many, many things that we don't necessarily support yet. But we are helping, right? We're helping provide these as this comment here, right, at the velocity of cloud. And this is one of the cool things that I saw at AT&T is that if we build these toolings, we build APIs, we build the standards, we build CI/CD into our cloud platforms, and we convert our organizations to DevOps, right? We support things like hackathons and all of these kinds of things that are kind of cool in the open source community, but we're a little risky in the closed source platforms, of the past. Then we're making it look easy, right? By getting the community to do a lot of the work for us. So this is another thing with the telecom industry. I've heard this one a few times, and I kind of like it. We're not in the failure business. We're in the communication business, or as Beth said, we bill monthly or something of that nature, right? But the coolness factor, again, is this people thing, right? We talk to people in other countries all the time. We access data about those people, on Facebook or something, or LinkedIn. We send photos. The 5-year-old in the U.S. really wants his phone to work because he's going to send pictures of himself to his dad in Iraq, right? That kind of stuff. So people all over the country, all over the world are making calls across borders, right? Because people live on the other side. Again, the cell users are all age ranges, right? 5 years to 85, something like that, more. Telecommunications is for people. I mean, it may be part of big business, it may be part of the military. In the end, all of these groups are composed of people. And it needs to just work. So I have some drawings, getting a little bit back in the technical side of things for just a bit. I tend to live in the strategic architecture space, so this is one variant of the NIST diagram, or the NIST model of cloud computing. that I see all the time. And one of the components here, talking about telecom, is generally people think of, not too far, here we go. People think of telecom in our industry as being this one layer right here in the sweet spot of cloud architecture. Is that, the telco is only this cloud carrier, which all of the data goes over, right? And it leaves out the concept that the telco actually does all of these other things above too, like anyone else does, right? A telco isn't just a carrier. A telco is a user of very complex computing, in some cases more than almost all other enterprises. So we have in the NIST model these pretty common things, right? We have a consumer, we have an auditor. An auditor just is this external company, a third party, which somehow will grant you this believability that they know you did everything right or wrong and will honestly or ethically say so, right? There's this other component, which I live in a lot, the cloud broker, and the things in the middle, right? I've got a need for a cloud provider. Say that was Amazon, right? Or Rackspace. And they have to have service orchestration where they have IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS. You have resource abstraction, your physical layer. We've got hardware in a facility with HVAC. You've got cloud service management, which has all your nice business data, and security and privacy. This is a great model. If you jump forward and trying to make this one sort of overlap in maybe a little more reality as a concept, we get into this this tool called the Cloud Management Platform. This gets kind of beyond the concept of many companies, right? If you're talking to an HP or an IBM or an EMC, cloud management platforms become important because, well, if you're going to have 1,000 servers, then you're going to have all these things that happen on 1,000 servers, and you want to have a cloud management platform so it lets you have CMDB, you're going to go out and start doing ITIL and all these kinds of more complicated IT processes that a 5 or 10 person startup really doesn't care about, right? You still have SaaS and PaaS and IaaS, of course, but you also get more into this brokered model or a hybrid model, if you want to call it that, where I have something maybe that's a public PaaS and I've got a PaaS that's perhaps on my private network, but it may not be. It may be shared. It may be a single PaaS, right? I've got IaaS and servers again. And then you get into this this kind of more complex general cloud architecture. Now, I've done something like this with a few of the telcos now, and it's, again, this is a strategic level, not drilling down, right? But you have these three main layers, right? Up here at the top, I have the things that people see, and I mean people usually outside of IT guys who make the cloud work, right? I've got UIs of some sort, I've got APIs, I've got some maybe business UIs, I've got the DevOps guys UIs with admin and all of that kind of thing, and I've maybe got some others, right? Whatever they happen to be. I have at the top of these things usually some kind of a UI and API main handler, main bus, if you want to call it that, right? I've got different things around the planet serving all of this stuff up, but there's some layer there. Maybe it's your white labeling or what have you. In the middle, I've got this cloud management platform or cloud management platform and orchestration with all kinds of nice things inside of it, handling my UI aggregation, my fulfillment of requests, and all of these kinds of things. And between that layer and the layer below, I have to do API aggregation because I now have many, many complex things down below. And I want to publish forward, outbound, a single API with my own namespace. If I'm Verizon, for example, and I want to publish a Verizon Cloud API, I don't want it necessarily to say OpenStack, or say EMC, or say Service Mesh, or any of these other companies that have APIs that I might want to expose the function of, but not the name of, right? You have a similar thing at the bottom in this case where I've got, say, Amazon, Azure, Rackspace, AT&T, Google. I've got many cloud providers out there that I might want to consume. And I want to publish those things forward as resources up through my stack and outbound, right? So here I have a similar service provider aggregation of APIs. Sometimes you'll have in internal clouds, I've got tons and tons of these kinds of things, and I'm going to have to go out and get something like Intel Expressway or 3 or 4 of these different API gateways like Apogee or something like that, just to handle all of this traffic. So this is something I've actually seen a few times. I don't know, Beth, have you seen this inside of Verizon, but where we actually have some of the cases with the telcos I've worked with, that they are actually using other companies' cloud, right? And they have good reasons to do it that way. Whether or not, as when I worked with HP, if Meg Whitman would have thought it was a great idea for us to be using Amazon at the same time that we were building HP Cloud Services, someone will think it's a good idea and someone won't. But it will work this way for a while.
My experience is that pretty much every large company has some rogue group that's gone out and set up something on AWS. And Verizon, it turns out, is also in that group.
Yeah. So you also see, there's another case in the telcos that, say we look at Azure, and I would expect Amazon is in that, in this same space, and it as well as someone hosting something on AT&T, or maybe AT&T hosting something on someone else's platforms, where you have a business arrangement, you have a share of the money that's coming in from selling this service that Azure has, right? If you're a telco in some other part of the country, you're over in Europe in HP or Microsoft or whoever wants to go spin up a cloud there, right? And you have all of the facility, but you're a competing company. Well, you may still say, okay, well, all right, Microsoft, you want to run Azure in my country. I have all of this data center space and I want to use it. I want to resell that, right? So it's very likely at the scale that these businesses are, that these are other borders that are being crossed, right? You might not think of it if you're a particular kind of an enterprise here, that you would necessarily share your business, your resources, and your income with them. But at the scale of telcos, this actually happens pretty regularly.
It actually happens all the time because it's a network and we have to peer.
Yeah, you have to peer. And so this concept, right, Google competes with Amazon, but they're in the same building often, right? And, you know, where do the servers that have all of Apple's, you know, iOS firmware upgrades actually exist? They exist in some place in Cupertino? No, they exist in some data center really close to some, as you know, I like to call it dark fiber, right? And that's going to be in some telco's data center. I know one of them, but you know I won't say because I'm not supposed to say that one. But that's one of the architectures that I find kind of interesting to talk about. This is another one. This is consumption models, right? Again, this is all the model piece of your architecture. So CMS is another term for cloud management platform, CMS, CMP, right? And you have these models where, say, I have a management platform. I'm going to consume Amazon, Azure, and OpenStack. In this layer, maybe being my PaaS layer, I'm going to use Beanstalk or Azure App Services or Cloud Foundry. And I find that the telcos are also doing all kinds of different models. Different teams within the telco will be using different models. One of the groups that I worked with said, hey, we're going to go for a pure cloud play. And they went out and said, all right, we're going to use Clicker, and we're going to talk to Amazon, and we're not going to use anything else. And they have live apps on there right now. They did it in like 6 months. We're not buying any more hardware. They got approval from their CIO, and they went, right? Another part of the same company said exactly the opposite, except for they're also going to use Clicker. Like, ooh, Clicker that was a good idea. We're going to use Clicker, but we're going to get OpenStack on bare metal, and we're going to get lots of big bare metal. Well, we're only going to run a few apps on it, but that's okay. We're going to get lots and lots of bare metal because, you know, it's a telco and they have money, right? But it's interesting that in both cases, they have the same statement as far as what they've done, right? We built this thing. Their model to achieve it, it was really actually different, but at the layer up above, Oh, going the wrong way again. At the layer up above, they have presented this same component. What they did is change how they did it all below, right? And okay, if I'm going to say I'm going to do a pure cloud play and I don't want to have any infrastructure, one of the other telcos I worked with actually says they're going to do this. And I had, me and a few other people, had a long discussion with them about all of their existing internal hardware that talks to their existing switching network where all of their actual calls come through. And they said, no, we're going to move everything to the cloud. We're just going to do it. And we have approval from the CIO, CEO, and we're just, that's what's going to be done. Like, okay, that's cool. I know actually see how that will happen, but they're going to try it. So again, I see all these different kinds of models going on, right? And the telcos are doing everything everyone else is doing because they have so much scale, right? This is another one. It's the concept of migration. I don't remember which of the gentlemen said earlier that you're never going to get rid of the legacy, and I completely agree. But in this concept here, you know, I'm kind of covering it. All right, I have this idea of private cloud and public cloud, and there's this big box where everything is hybrid. Of course, hybrid is not just private and public, right? It's two disparate clouds that are being combined into one. But essentially, you get this kind of a pattern, right, where I have an application, because everything that you're doing is about the application. How are you applying what you have, right? I may be running it on hardware, then I'm going to put it on some kind of virtualization. Maybe I put on more advanced virtualization with OpenStack or VMware or whatever, right? And then maybe I start moving towards something a little more sophisticated where I have true IaaS, right? And I have maybe some true PaaS. And I'm going down this model where my apps are actually services, right? And then maybe my apps are services on PaaS, on IaaS. All of these models exist in parallel. This concept that we're going to do a migration from, hey, we're over here in the dark ages and tomorrow we're going to be over here. As Beth said, in telco, that never happens. It's not going to happen. It doesn't happen at NASA. It's not happening at FBI, right? That doesn't actually happen. So you have to have all of these things in parallel. And that question about upgrade in supporting past versions of things in OpenStack, I think, is also pretty key there. One of my examples in the government was in the late 80s, after I wasn't working on the shuttle program. I worked on this project where we emulated computers that had long since burned up and been put in the landfill because we had applications that talked to satellites that are in orbit, right? So what the government had done was contracted with a company, Varian, to make computers that were capable of emulating these older computers, but they were brand new, lots of gold chips and all that kind of wonderful stuff. And we emulated very, very old computers to do this at. In one of those rooms, I actually worked on an ENIAC because it was there and it was turned on and it did something. But it was live in 1987. So these are some process models to talk about just for a minute. OpenStack is involved in this space, not because it's OpenStack, but because of the era that it came about, right? We have this model of DevOps, we have Git, and we have, you know, all these repos, and we have people who work in common trunks, and they commit, and then there's a common test phase, and then they advance, they're promoted. But what I find most interesting in talking to the larger enterprises, and again, telcos being one of them, this same problem exists for everyone around the world who's running any enterprise, and the telcos definitely aren't dropped off on this. So I have this path here where I'm going to go through, you know, some kind of dev ideation, right? Raw development, test, QA, so forth. And maybe out here, if I say all these things are in production in that they're publicly visible, right? I have this other matrix that goes on. I have things that interact with partners. I have something in a public, they have something in a public. We're trying to see if they work together, right? I've got things where, okay, they're public, but developers are maybe still dinking with it. And I have these ones that the customers can see. And I have multiple versions of those things. I have maybe what's proposed, right? Work in progress, but it's out there. Customers are actually able to use it, test it out for me, tell me if they like it or not, right? I have what's maybe actually next, right? Really's gone through all the approvals, but I haven't done all the cutovers because I've got 300 million customers and only 1 million of them are on it right now, right? And I've got current, where the rest of my 300 million customers are. And all of these things have to run in parallel. So this CI/CD model, right, as we're using more and more today, this is one of the hardest sells. Still, DevOps in a CI/CD model is one of the hardest sells. It's not, can I get servers and put OpenStack on it? It's, yes, you can get servers and put OpenStack on it, but you have to build some things for me, and 6 months from now you can put an app on it, right? You're like, okay, one of my projects at HP was, I got this team that was doing shrink wrap every 6 months to deploying, through the whole test process, burning AMIs and the whole nine, 127 times a day, so they could put their whole app live, right? For one of the Salesforce integration things that we did. You can put it live in Amazon 127 times a day. Everything's running in parallel, right? So it's like bang, 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 bang. And when I talked to a couple of telcos about that, they're like, you're just absolutely insane. That just will not happen, right? Now, it's not that they don't start this model, because they have. A number of them have tried this. They've started it. They're learning how to do it, right? Whether they're going to adopt it or accept it or not. And again, this is happening all over the planet. It's the same problem. It's not an OpenStack problem necessarily because it's something different. It's just in the era. And one of the places where this is being driven by OpenStack into the telcos is if you go sit down with someone like Pivotal or Cloud Foundry, or, in my case, I had a bunch of people from Swisscom go sit down with the guys at Piston before Cisco bought them. And they learned this is how it's being done there. And they wanted to jump in and learn how to work with OpenStack themselves, right? But they want to model an existing program. So we cycled a few developers in with a couple of these other companies so they could see how it's being done. Well, they didn't change 20,000 people overnight, but they changed a few, right? We changed a few in Germany, we changed a few in Switzerland, a few in the US, and then you start breeding this, this groundswell, hopefully. These other ones are pretty basic, right? We have a simple project roadmap, right? This kind of a thing is pretty standard for people. I have an ideation at the beginning. I build my my requirements. I go through some sponsorship and buy-in. I build a team. I go make a POC. I get something to beta. And sooner or later, I get out into production. And this is really cool when you're talking about smaller deployments. I'm gonna get 3 or 4 stacks. It might take me a couple racks to do that, right? I can get this all done. I can probably do it in 5 or 6 months, right? In the telco space, as I said, I did one that was 325,000 servers. That takes years. I would argue that 10,000 servers for most companies would take a couple of years. Just because you have to actually go find places for all of this gear. There may be things in those buildings already, or you have to buy buildings. So you have to buy land and put buildings on top of them, right? So that you can have modern HVAC in them and have all the right power and all of those kinds of things. 2 years is maybe aggressive at that scale, right?
But you're also leaving out the whole business process.
Exactly. Exactly.
You got 6 months or a year of convincing the management to spend the money.
Exactly. So that's one of the things that, to talk about as far as in this crossing borders concept, right? That if you're going to make these kinds of commitments, you have to have a pretty good idea of what the rest of your industry is doing. So if you're trying to telco, you maybe don't necessarily care what's going on in the US, but that's actually untrue, right? They send people out and they base them in Palo Alto, or they base them up here in Bellevue, and they see what's going on, and they start following how other people are doing things long before they make these kinds of commitments to do something, right? Not that that's necessarily new, but they sit in OpenStack conferences like, competing telcos might do in this room, or competing vendors will do, and we see what everyone else is doing, right? It's a good, healthy looking over each other's shoulders. So I showed this particular slide in an earlier variation to Toby Ford a few years ago. And it was, I had this nice presentation I was doing, and it was all about Beam Me Up Scotty, which is one of those nerdy things I like, right? And so in virtualization, we have a lot of people who are still really, hey, if I can virtualize some servers, I'm doing awesome things, right? I've got ESXi, and I go by vSphere, and all I do is virtualize a couple of servers, right? The PETS model is still, I'm really only putting some bare metal stuff in virtualization on a server, right? And then we get, hey, we're going to do some stacks. And so OpenStack generally is used by people to build stacks of things, right? They're not talking about Juju and orchestrating applications on top of these servers, right? And okay, now we're going to start making applications. And then you start getting into the idea of business segments, right? Well, a telco is a vertical to a lot of us, right? Medical industry is a vertical. So maybe I'm looking at, I'm going to start orchestrating or modifying segments. And you start getting, when it gets cool, you're over here saying, I could do a city. What can I put New York City, all of what New York City's IT is on OpenStack? Oh, that could possibly even happen, right? If I'm going to affect countries, I doubt you're really going to do either of those things, really. But a country is a pretty big want. Civilization, other than telcos, you're not affecting any of these larger scale things, right? The telcos are because of the phone system, right? But none of the rest of us really necessarily are going to change all that much, all that fast. So how much of all this stuff is happening now? Some of this is and isn't there depending on your perception. Mobile, global first, right? We're going to transform everything, transform it all to the cloud. You can do everything from your cell phone. Hey, one of the things I had a couple years ago is try turning off your laptop or your desktop PC and run your whole business day on your cell phone, right? And all of your data really is in the cloud because it won't fit on your cell phone. Actually try it out. That transition is happening pretty quickly now. I see a lot of people actually don't bring a laptop with them anymore. I still do, and mine is huge. I feel really like a monstrosity when I sit down, right? You have this cloud in your pocket, right? Have we done this? You have your one location, which is all of your data, all of your apps, all of you, 100% backed up worldwide, and go anywhere. Can I go to Germany and have all my data? Man, it sure seems close. It's not, but it sure seems close. The closer it gets, the more it's costing me. But it's pretty close. So this is another thing. Okay, this has not been done, but it's one of my little Chet's wish lists, right? If I could put a couple of racks in every single cell tower in the world, I could have this distributed, really high, powerful edge network with edge computing, and that would be really rockin' awesome, right? Because there's power there already. I mean, why not do it, right? And the other one is
to be located on mountains.
Yeah, exactly, right?
They're a little hard to get to.
So it's pretty wishful thinking. And then the other is, well, how about cell phones and hosting data and this vast CDN or memory compute network? Well, people are working on that one. So that adoption, that's another topic, right? Who's gonna put that in the phone company's user plan that someone signs up for? Yeah, at this price you get to share your phone's compute capacity, and it'll only cost you what, right?
Well, now see, the whole problem is it just shifts everything to the network, basically. So you're putting a lot of stress on the network when you do that.
Yeah.
So that's why Comcast moved to the CDN in the cloud instead of on the desktop box. It was not for altruism. It was because it was costing the company a lot to run to run all that data over the network.
Yeah. This concept, I had a chat with Colin McDonald, who was then I guess the VP of Cloud at Canonical. I don't remember who he works for now. And there, this thing with the open telco gear, right? In rural America and some of the other rural countries, you can get open gear that'll do everything that a telco will do in a kind of a watered down state, right? And there are these ideas that you can use your cell phone with its multiple radios, and they can all talk to each other and create their own local cluster, right? The technology to do this isn't really actually there to make it cost effective, right? To do it, yes. Cost effective, no. And would the cell companies really want to do it today? No, right? So that's, again, that's a kind of a little science fiction-y, right? Communication resources, 100% pay as you use. Some emergency grace, you know, that we got your back thing. That actually is pretty much there with a cell phone right now, right? If your line no longer functions, you're supposedly able to do a 911 call, right? That kind of thing. GPS is there, 3G, 4G, there's some new thing, I don't know what it is, beats me.
LTE.
LTE, there you go. Business continuity. Business continuity is actually pretty much there, but we don't really use it that way. We're not applying it, right? To make this concept of business continuity like air, that you just breathe and it's always there, right? I'm going to make business continuity zero cost. And by that I mean, if you're Amazon and you'd known in advance how bad it was going to be when Netflix crashed, right? That even though Amazon had told Netflix to design their apps better, right? That Netflix going down was going to make Amazon look really bad, right? Well, then Amazon might have said, we're just going to automatically back up all your stuff and we're going to ship it over to California and it'll come up. That's not going to happen, but the technology is actually there. That was one of the things I talked to Swisscom about. In their, they had 3 data centers. I can't remember the third one is, but one in Zurich and one in Bern. And the lag time between 2 of them is so small, they could actually do this, right? You can actually have a mirror of your whole service in Zurich for the one that's running in Bern and have it be so short a cutover that you wouldn't actually notice the difference on the outside. It would be in the milliseconds of data loss. So that's possible, right? Automatic data replication, automatic system, right? And that concept that you're not in the failure business. Actually selling that is really hard. Technologically it can be done, right? But choosing to make someone else make a decision they don't want to make, most people don't want to do.
Well, we actually do that. I mean, the telecoms do it automatically, but it costs money, right? So, you know, I always, you know, so I have a thing where, you know, I'm selling a service and our competitors, well, it costs half the money. I'm like, yeah, well, that's because with us you get a redundant circuit, and with the competitor you have to buy 2 circuits, so it costs the same.
Exactly. So I had this discussion, let's see if I have it on the next slide or not. No. So I had this discussion about what could we do, it might be in one of the future slides here, what could we do better than what we did at Amazon? And I'll flip through these first, and I'll talk about it if I remember. I'm probably out of time. How am I? I'm over? All right, so I'll click through then instead of doing that. So again, this is just evangelism now, right? People have awesome ideas. What we do is really pretty cool, right? We need to give people the things they need, the tool chains to get this stuff done. They need a wealth of knowledge to get it done. We need critical mass in this industry. OpenStack guys are just so hard to find, right? And so if we can go out and foster personal growth, you know, support OpenStack just for the sake of it, support open source, global development, education, and access, right? Help people. One of the cool projects I saw from Swisscom is they're going out and, hey, let's get kids in and show them how to do stuff, have them write APIs and all that kind of thing, right? So we're best suited to make these things happen, not just because we're working on OpenStack, but because of the kinds of people that we work with, right? I maintain the telcos are in many respects probably the best able to contact the most people, the most often, all over the planet. Otherwise there wouldn't be 6.8 billion cell phones running, right? And so also I think the telecom is actually delivering on this kind of thing today. Not in every case necessarily, maybe not without kicking and screaming a little bit, maybe not without being completely aware, because there are certain groups within each company that's making it happen. But that border crossing function is happening. And these are my reference slides and I'm done. I don't know, these things are downloadable, right? Okay. Any questions? And I need to wrap and turn it over to the next folks.
Just a quick question.
Yeah.
On the cloud brokerage side of the architectural slide that you shared,
Yeah.
that's something that our company focuses 100% on, is that aggregation model, building the connectors, whether it's OpenStack, VMware, CloudStack, whatever, and trying to provide sort of that infrastructure agnostic fabric that telcos, data centers, IT resellers can leverage. From your perspective, does it seem like that's something traditionally telco would look to sort of develop themselves?
I've seen, yeah, that's an excellent question. I've seen both the grow your own concept or buy someone else's. And there's a couple of different models of company choice that goes into that, right? I want to have a single throat to choke. Someone else is going to make that, and if they don't do it right, I'm gonna go after them.
Interesting analogy.
Yeah, well, it came out of a telco that told me that one actually. So it depends on the company. I think in our case, if they're a technology company and they have resources that can perhaps actually do the work, and they believe that they know their business better than you know it, then they may want and they may do it and they may do it well. Most of the folks I've talked to as far as the telecom side, they like to have someone else come in and do something for them, pay them, use their expertise, onboard what they want, and dispose of the rest. I know of a couple telcos who have gotten hardcore into OpenStack. They're going to build their own. They're going to get the trunk version and so forth. I don't expect that's going to end, but it's not going to be every company because they're all different, right? They all have different leadership and they all have different engineering teams and, however they actually. Hmm?
What they want out of it could be different too. Like for some, they may, no, we want our own IaaS up there, and we'll just basically offer the SaaS titles, or whether it's hosted titles or whatever. But
Oh, exactly right.
Model applies to their
Yeah.
ecosystem is always the key, right?
Yeah.
And if they got the chops in house, boom, they can do it. But I just thought I was curious what the telco perspective of that process is.
Well, it's different company to company. If they're building IP that has to do specifically with the telco or the telco industry, they're going to want to do it themselves, right? Probably, or they're going to want to acquire a company that does that, right? So if you were doing IPAM or something of that nature, you're emerging but not, a too small little company, but you've got some cool stuff that has to do with IPAM or API aggregation or some of those things that fit in that architecture. There are definitely telcos that are looking to acquire you today, right? Because they're doing that. I know a couple telcos that are like actively acquiring, software-defined network firms, right? And so, yeah, they may do it in-house, but they may buy someone else to do it, right? They may do it by contract or they may do it by acquisition. Yeah, I got to wrap. Thank you.